Good afternoon and welcome to Concepts of Victim Offender Dialogue, a presentation of the Restorative Justice Task Team of the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ, with the help of the Ahimsa Collective and Liz McNenny, a survivor of a homicide victim and a participant in a VOD process. I'm your moderator, Mike Rich, an attorney and longtime member of the task team. Thanks to all of you who have made this possible and to all who are here with us this afternoon. Our panelists, in order of their appearance during the meeting, are Brenda Nolan of Falmouth, Mass., chair of the task team, who will make some housekeeping announcements and try to help us get to know a little bit about each other. Next up after that will be Sam Lovett, whom I will say more about before his short presentation of perspectives on restorative justice practices. After Sam, I will introduce you in more detail to Martina Lutz Schneider, who is the director of the VOD program for the Ahimsa Collective, who will tell you about the organization and concepts of victim offender dialogue. And then Liz McNenny will discuss her experiences in seeking and eventually being able to participate in a dialogue with the man who shot and killed her brother. So please welcome Brenda Nolan.
Hello. I was going to have us all check in by name, but there are not quite a number of people who have joined us. So instead, if you're willing, I'm just going to ask you if you would wave your hand if you're in any of the following categories. And please feel free not to respond if you would like. And also, if you're in more than one category, feel free to wave your hand for whatever category I name. So the first is, are you a restorative justice practitioner? And you can wave your hand. Do you work and care about restorative justice in the criminal legal system? Are you a survivor? Are you interested in bringing restorative practices to your community, however you identify? It could be in your neighborhood, your family, your faith community, your workplace. Oh, did I miss any category? Megan? I saw Megan's hand go up. I was wondering if if I missed a category you wanted to mention.
No, I'm just not doing my reactions very well. You're good, Brenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. So I'd like to mention questions, about putting questions in the chat. We would like to have time for Q&A. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat and put a question mark before you put the question in, so it's easy for us to notice the questions. I would like to also mention something about the recording. We hope to put the recording up on the Restorative Justice section of the United Church of Christ, Southern New England United Church of Christ website. And so be mindful of people's privacy and confidentiality. And if anyone has second thoughts about something they said or an oops, I will be sending a note out with my email address in it. I will put in the subject line SNEUCC so that you know that it's from me. And you can respond to me to say that you said something, you had an oops or something, and then I will look at the recording and see what we can do about that. And so I would like to turn the mic over to Sam, who will give a quick little RJ 101 from his experience and perspective.
Hold off if you would for just a second, Sam, while I introduce you in a little more detail. And Brenda, while I've got the floor, My computer says live transcription through closed captioning is happening, but I don't see it anywhere on my screen. Is anybody who needs the closed captioning able to see it? Or
I think you may have to enable it
okay,
on your own screen.
right, so yeah,
I think you go down to live transcript and there's a little caret there, and I think if you click on that, it will allow you to enable it if you want the live transcription.
okay. So how do we let people that need it know that it's there?
I think Brenda.
I don't know the answer to that.
Brenda makes an announcement.
Yeah, okay, so we've now talked about it. Well, talking about it may not help for people that need the
That's
live
true.
captioning.
And I don't do enough sign language, so okay, it's not going to help.
So maybe if you could put a note in the chat, Brenda, about that while I'm introducing Sam.
Okay.
Our next presenter, Sam Lovett, is a recently ordained in the UCC. He's currently serving as a school chaplain at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire. Sam studied religion and conflict transformation at the BU School of Theology while completing an MDiv, Master in Divinity, and has volunteered with Communities for Restorative Justice in the Greater Boston area since 2016. As a high school and former college chaplain, Sam has worked to incorporate restorative practices into both academic and residential settings by drawing on the work and inspiration of many different restorative justice groups and practitioners. Thank you for being with us today, Sam.
Well, it's great to be together in this way, and thank you, Mike, and thank you, Brenda. And it's great. You know, I've been a member of the task team for a few years, but it's great to kind of be together in this format this afternoon and this evening. As Mike said, I offered to give a very brief kind of restorative justice 101, just so that we have some shared words and names and things in our minds, kind of for tonight's discussion and for tonight's presentation. So I'll just offer a few things, pertinent pieces of background, not meant to be a complete look, but rather just a selection of thoughts. And certainly I want to frame these as through the impressions of through my own experiences and identity as a white faith practitioner and chaplain from New England who studied this in a theological context. But I know that what is great about restorative practices and restorative justice is that when a group like this gathers, there's a lot of collective wisdom. And so that the things that I'm not able to speak to, I hope that we'll be able to kind of share contact information and be able to speak to those as a collective. I'm zooming in from Concord, New Hampshire, on the traditional lands and waterways of Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki people, past, present, and future. Abenaki people means people of the dawn, and I'd just like to recommend a 2018 documentary that many of us may have already seen, but if you have not, Dawnland, the documentary, which is about the Wabanaki and State of Maine Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is an important look at the impacts of Maine's child welfare system on Native American communities in Maine, and is a wonderful storytelling documentary. So restorative justice is defined in a number of ways. In kind of the biggest sense is kind of an attention and an attunement to practices concerned with relationships and establishing or reestablishing meaningful connections and accountability in community relationships. So practices that kind of speak to those building of the mutual connection among people in important ways. For many of us, restorative justice also speaks to terms such as victim and offender, or responsible party and impacted party, and the community, as together we search for solutions which promote repair, reconciliation, and reassurance. both kind of reactive to things that have happened and preventative, kind of a community that can build capacity together. And so community, relationships, and accountability. These are three major terms that kind of run throughout a lot of conversations around restorative justice. In North America, conversations around restorative justice originate from at least four sources, many more, but four, particularly Aboriginal indigenous justice teachings, faith communities, the prison abolition movement, and the alternative dispute resolution movement. And so I just want to read a paragraph from three different books speaking to these sections. And I want to bring Kay Pranis into our conversation with an example of kind of peacemaking circles and kind of the context of using an indigenous practice as a restorative practice. And she writes, peacemaking circles are ancient spaces, recurring in various forms in many cultures. Probably our ancestors gathered in a circle around a fire, just as families gather around the kitchen table today. Long before we delegated our conflicts to experts, we came together in ancient peacemaking spaces to work through our differences and to make decisions towards the common good. The essence of circles isn't new, but tested over millennia and in many different cultures. Aboriginal societies have preserved these spaces as a living part of their cultures, passing on ancient wisdom about how to call forth the best in us most when we need it. The willingness of Aboriginal communities to share this nearly lost tradition with people from the very cultures that sought to assimilate or destroy them is a testament to the peacemaking wisdom that circles still instill. And so Kay Pranis and this book, From Conflict to Community, Peacemaking Circles, is a kind of important text for many of us thinking of kind of practical ways to gather, founded in Indigenous practice. Secondly, for faith communities, a book that came to mind was Howard Zehr's Changing Lenses. Howard Zehr, one of the developers and thinkers of restorative practice, both from a faith and academic standpoint, and talks about kind of this idea of covenant in our faith traditions, a covenant between the divine and people, and he talks about, particularly in scripture, the Old Testament story is one of repeated deliverance, repeated acts of salvation. The prophets understood these repeated acts of deliverance to be part of God's commitment stated in God's covenant to God's people. And so even though God's people frequently fell down on their end of the responsibilities implied in the covenant, the prophets maintained that God had remained faithful to the original promise. And so this idea of kind of being committed to the divine and the divine being committed to us has kind of inspired many people in their practices. And then finally, from Angela Davis, Are Prisons Obsolete? A few words about the prison abolition movement. She writes, many organizations and individuals, both in the United States and other countries, offer alternative modes of making justice. In limited instances, some governments have attempted to implement alternatives that range from conflict resolution to restorative or reparative justice. Such scholars such as Herman Bianchi have suggested that crime needs to be defined in terms of tort. So instead of criminal law, it should be reparative law. In his words, the lawbreaker is thus no longer an evil-minded man or woman or person, but simply a debtor, a liable person whose human duty is to take responsibility for their actions and to assume the duty of repair. So just a few kind of reflections from people who have really cultivated this space and helped us to kind of mark signposts on the journey for being community together, for learning how to repair relationships when they are in need of it. And tonight, we kind of are blessed to kind of be able to speak a little bit about the alternative dispute resolution movement, particular expressions of that with the victim offender dialogue model, which is one among many. And if you have questions about those other models, I can put my email in the chat. but I'm grateful for the conversation that we have ahead tonight and the presentation that we have tonight or this afternoon in many cases. I'm jealous of those whose pictures have sunlight still. I'm very much in the dark here. Yeah, grateful for the opportunity in my work to benefit from all the thinkers who have developed ideas of restorative justice in the context of college and high school, how we live together well. So David Karp, for example, is somebody who's taken these practices and applied them for people like me who work with young people. So that's what I have. I don't know if we're going to do Q&A here. We may just keep on going, but I'll turn it to Mike and Brenda to point us in the right direction.
Thank you, Sam. Next up is Martina Lutz Schneider, VOD Director for the Ahimsa Collective. Martina was introduced to restorative justice by Dominic Barter in 2003 through her engagement with nonviolent communication. She's a devoted restorative justice advocate and has volunteered in school and prison settings. She received her BA in interdisciplinary studies from the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco with a focus on restorative justice, and a conflict resolution certificate from Sonoma State University. In 2015, Martina began facilitating victim offender dialogues in severe and violent crimes in California state prisons through Insight Prison Project. She now collaborates directly with the California Office of Victim and Survivors' Rights and Services and serves as a VOD consultant and VOD lead facilitator. Thank you for being with us and helping us prepare this presentation, Martina.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was a little shocked when you said 2003. That's like, I'm gonna soon be going on doing this work for 20 years. So time flies when you're having fun. So a little bit about who we are. As I said, I'm with the Ahimsa Collective. We are in California. Our founder was Sonia Shah, who is placed on the national stage of restorative justice. And we started out mainly working inside prison. We do what's called insight and accountability groups, which is really helping people inside prison to understand, what they have done and why they have done it, and really come to full responsibility and accountability. We also recently started a victim impact course in 2 prisons. And then we have a reentry home, and we have a healing center in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where survivors or anybody who works in this field can just come and get a nice retreat time out. And then we're also doing the victim offender dialogues, which I started in 2015. And that is the most amazing work ever. I feel extremely blessed and graced to be able to do this work. I like to describe victim offender dialogues as from the worst of who we can be as human beings to the very best as human beings. And so this is, right, it is part of restorative justice. And in a way, it, falls into the more pure form of restorative justice, where really the person who has caused the harm, which is the offender, we're very, aware of language. We're trying to get away from labeling language. We have inherited the victim offender dialogue term. We would call it harm dialogues, and we refer to the people more by their experience. So we talk about the person who has caused harm, the responsible person, and for the victim or survivor, a lot of people don't like to be called victims, so we refer to them as the person harmed, the person, who got hurt, kind of always trying to center that we are working first and foremost with human beings and people, which is kind of part of what's called the humanistic approach to this work. And yeah, I'd like to start with one of our very youngest VOD facilitators and what she said about her VOD, her victim offender dialogue, which is, the face-to-face meeting after however long preparation meeting where a survivor can ask to meet the person who's harmed them, who's incarcerated in any state prison. And so our youngest person was 18 years old. And what she says was, the victim offender dialogue boils down to this: seeing and being seen, listening and being heard, revealing our truth, and then bearing witness to that of our fellow man, no matter how difficult that might be. It is the profoundest gift that one can give or receive, because too often a person's truth becomes a burden to bear or to be buried. So the victim offender dialogue, the bearing witness, it doesn't seem like much to just be listening, but it's really a powerful agent in healing. And so the way it is set up in California, and in most states in the USA, the victim offender dialogues are housed in or live with the Department of Correction Victim Services. And in most states, also the VODs are facilitated by systems people, part of the Department of Correction. And California is a little unusual in that because the facilitation is actually referred out to restorative justice agencies. So we are a volunteer organization. Our facilitators are volunteers. Most of them have done in-prison work and have, helped and worked with folks inside prison to really come to accountability and understand why they did what they did, which is a very, very important question for many survivors, really wanting to know, why did you do this? So we're volunteer-based and through restorative justice agencies. None of the information and anything we know of the process goes back to victim services. And for the person who's caused the harm participating in the VOD, it actually doesn't even show up in their file, in their prison file. We call it a central file. And that is to ensure that the motivation to be part of a victim offender dialogue is really for them, to make it right with the survivor and to give back what they can, what is possible in terms of, taking accountability, and to not try to, we don't want people, let me do this and then I'm going to get a lesser sentence. So it really keeps the motivation clear. And it's all both people, it's voluntarily, nobody is coerced in any way. One of our core values is agency. So we say it's victim-centered, offender-sensitive. And victim-centered means that, we're really trying to put the people who are asking for this face-to-face meeting, the survivor, in the driver's seat. And as a facilitator, my job is really to find out what they are wanting, what matters to them, what's important, what are their hopes, what are their questions. And to facilitate only means to make easy. So, and after a survivor has initiated and asked for a dialogue, there is a screening that happens of the person who's caused the harm. If there is active appeals going, or if there are restraining orders, there's, victim offender dialogue cannot take place. They look if somebody is really violent or, has emotional issues. But even if that is the case, we might still be able to work with them. But so there's a screening. Once the screening happened, the case gets referred to. Here in California, there are 4 restorative justice agencies who provide VOD facilitators. Then we go in contact with first the survivor, talk to them, get to know them, see what they're wanting and what their hopes are. Then we go into prison and meet with the person who's caused the harm, see if they're willing to meet. Most of them do. I would say we had about 90 cases so far since 2015, and about 80% are homicide. Most of them say yes because they've been in prison for, I think the closest was like 3 years, but most survivors come like 20 years later or more. So people have been sitting with what they have done for a while and actually really, really appreciate the opportunity to be accountable. We have few people who've said no. And then since the Me Too movement, we're getting more and more people interested in doing dialogues around sexual harm. More and more young women in their late 30s, or late 20s, early 30s, who were survivors of sexual harm, who kind of, have something to say to the person who harmed them. And for those folks who have caused sexual harm, we get more who, have a much harder time admitting what they did. There's a lot of shame involved when you have caused sexual harm. So we get more people who say, no, I don't want to do it. So once everybody, has agreed, there are, in California, this is not legislated. And I think Texas is the only state where a victim offender dialogue is actually a victim's right. But we have operational guidelines from the Department of Corrections, and most prisons know that this is happening. It's only been 2 years that we're officially funded by the government. Before that, it was just kind of supported by, private grants. And so, once we're in the room with the people, there is a preparation phase that can last usually at least 3 months. Sometimes it can take a year or longer, just depending on the complexity of what happened. A lot of it is the accountability, because we really want people to be able to be fully accountable and take responsibility. That sometimes can take a little time for them to really fully step into that. And the main thing with people inside who've caused harm, what we work with, a huge topic is shame. Because, if you've been sitting in prison, and sooner or later, people seem to take to heart what they have done and feel a lot of remorse and shame. So we work with that. Again, accountability for them, helping them understand a little bit why they did what they did. So we do work with trauma, look at their, upbringing, what happened to them that they did this, because that's also often what survivors want to know. Why did you do this? And truth sometimes can be difficult, because what was said in court proceedings is not necessarily what really happened. That can be really challenging at times. It's kind of, we work with the survivor's understanding of what happened, with the person who's caused the harm, their understanding. And before we meet, we kind of want to have some, level of agreement of what happened. And that is often part of the preparation. And then our main work with the survivors is around, often there are questions, right? Again, of what happened, finding out the truth. They want to make sure that this never happens again, that a person learns and understands the impact. So they really want to share, how they were impacted as a human being, so that they can, support the person really getting to a place of having more embodied and a felt of experience of what they did, rather than you violated Penal Code 657, which doesn't mean anything, but having to face a mother who, is crying and sharing the pain of having lost a loved one, kind of really, and that is a lot of the restorative justice, right, impulse to really have that human understanding of the harm one has caused. Yes, and the people who ask for a VOD, and that's been the most amazing experience. It's really people who have kind of come to take agency of their own healing. So most of them have come to understand that though somebody else has caused the harm, they are the ones who need to take agency of their own well-being, and they want to be agents in their own healing process. So we get few people that are really, really, really angry, because when you go and meet the person who's harmed you, you're going to meet them, but you're also really meeting yourself. And if you're very, very angry, you have to face their own anger. And I think a lot of people who experience that are actually trying to push those emotions down because they don't really understand and have not been really supported in grieving, in processing what happened, and are, and doing a VOD then would bring up all those emotions again. And so few people come with that kind of emotional context. We get a lot of people, we actually get a lot of Christians because they think in Christianity, forgiveness is, part of the spiritual path. And so a lot of people, most of, I would say, survivors who really see the humanity in the person who's caused the harm. And I think I'm gonna, so the VODs themselves happen in the prison, right? It's a one time. Sometimes we will meet for 6 hours. These are very powerful encounters because both people have a piece of healing that the other person needs. For a survivor to get accountability and to see remorse, nobody but the person who's caused the harm could give that to them. So those are really, really powerful moments. And most survivors walk away with a huge burden lifted of they didn't even realize how much this has weighed them down, what happened. But to receive accountability and an expression of remorse is extremely helpful. And for the people who've caused the harm to look somebody in the eye and say, I did this, there is a strength and a power that they feel in themselves that they didn't even often know that they had. So anyway, I don't want to take up too much time, so we have a lot of time for Liz. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
There was one so far. We're a few minutes ahead of schedule, so we can do a couple questions now. So Rita asked, who initiates the request for the victim offender dialogue?
It's always, always, always survivor initiated. And that's to already, to term, like when you are victimized, somebody has power over you. So this is a way to protect the survivor and to make sure that from the beginning they are in the driver's seat and that we follow their lead. There is an attempt, and Maryland has started to do that, and we're also doing that. to make victim offender dialogue part of the resentencing process, because there's a lot of resentencing happening right now and people are getting out. And we would like survivors to have a chance to maybe meet with the person before they get out so they can see for themselves if the person is still a danger for society. Is this person maybe dangerous to me? Because some people will be released back into the community. So, but that it would still be, right, even if a survivor, if a person who is being resentenced is open to doing a dialogue, it still would go to the survivor and the survivor would have to initiate it.
And then Jody wrote, could you say again the name of the one state that requires, she wrote restorative justice, but I think you said it required victim offender dialogue.
Not required. Texas has it legislated. So in Texas, it's a victim's right to have a victim offender dialogue. And once it's legislated, the state has to fund it. Here in California, if we get a new governor who says, oh, no, I don't like it, I'm not interested in bringing restorative justice, our funding, we could lose our funding again. But once it's, a law, the government has to provide funding.
And then Jody also asked, is there any legal protection offered to the offender regarding the offender's truth-telling? If the offender tells the truth in the VOD session, that something that was not mentioned in court, can the offender have it held against them in the legal system?
In theory, yes, because as VOD facilitator, we do not fall under mediation protection. When we introduce the VOD program, to the people inside, to the offenders, we tell them that, and there is actually a release of liability from the Department of Corrections that needs to be signed, and it speaks to that very, very point. So, and we are the gatekeepers as facilitators, and if somebody, starts sharing something where they have not been charged for, we have a conversation about that, and, we do caution them to speak about that. But then we still didn't know it, right? And we could be subpoenaed. But mostly, and what the idea is to really only work with the incident that they have been charged with and already are convicted for. But we had people talk about it, and it's never been, in all the years, and I've never heard of it being an issue. But it's certainly something that all of our facilitators are very aware of, because we also work with that in prison, right, in the groups. So, but we're not legally protected, which is something we're hoping to work, to have mediation status so that we cannot be subpoenaed. At this point, we could be subpoenaed.
Thank you, Martina. David, I'm going to hold your question for later. I've made a note to get back to it. And now let me introduce my longtime friend and co-conspirator, Liz McNenny, who's the person who planted the seed for today's program a couple of years ago when we first started talking about restorative justice together, and that she had had a brother who was killed. Liz was born in Northeast Philadelphia. She has 4 sisters and had 1 brother. She graduated from Northeastern University with a BS in sociology and anthropology with distinction, and subsequently received a master's degree in church history and theology from Boston University School of Theology. On October 10th, 1975, Liz wrote, this happened on October 10th, she wrote it recently, But her world changed dramatically with the shooting of her only biological brother, John Joseph Charles McNenny Jr. A month later, John died as a result of the shooting. Approximately 2 years ago, 44 years after John's death, Liz embarked on a journey to discover more about it. Along the way, she discovered victim-offender dialogue and last month participated in a Zoom meeting with one of the offenders responsible for her brother's murder. She will tell you about that road towards healing and peace that is now underway. You are up, Liz. Let me move back a little and
all right,
give you more
so
of the screen.
in 2019, after approximately 44 years of various phases of anger and sorrow and resentment, I embarked on this journey to find out more about what happened to my brother. And interestingly enough, it started with talking with a law enforcement officer who was in the same department that handled my brother's case. That man eventually led me to the San Diego District Attorney's Office, and the San Diego District Attorney's Office sent me to the Ahimsa Collective, which is how I got started in the victim offender dialogue. Something that was going to be a face-to-face turned out to be not face-to-face because COVID came on the scene, and that's fine. I learned a lot about the dude who shot and killed my brother by reading transcripts of his parole hearings, starting with the very first one and then going on to a series of those transcripts over the years. I saw in those transcripts an evolution in his thinking and his ability to accept the profound nature of what he had done and how much he had harmed my family. You may not understand it in the context of just saying my family, but when you grow up in an Irish-German Catholic family and there's only one boy, you better believe that boy is important. And that's just the way it was then, maybe still is now, I don't know. When my brother was killed, it took the whole family apart. Very different reactions from my mother and my father, from my other sisters. I was probably the only one who from the beginning never wanted to see the two men who were involved in that killing killed themselves. From the very beginning, I wanted them to be free. I wanted them to serve maybe a minimum sentence and then do a lifetime of community service, because I damn well wanted them to remember with every fiber of their being what they had done to my family. So fast forward to 2019, and somewhere along the line that thinking changed after talking with the police officers involved, San Diego District Attorney, and reading those transcripts and then talking with Martina. I felt that the victim offender dialogue was going to bring me the most healing, sincere healing, not the surface, lay it down at the feet of the cross and hope like hell that Jesus didn't recognize that I took some of it back. Because there was a part that really wanted to wreak my own kind of justice. And my justice would have been a lifetime of community service. But that's almost as punitive as being in jail all that time. When we finally worked out all the details and, everybody got a chance to weigh in, including the offender, the meeting that took place, the Zoom meeting that took place in August, was just remarkable. It was cathartic. It was life affirming. And I believe sincerely that this gentleman, after spending 46 years in prison, needs to be out. He's been granted parole, but my understanding right now is that the governor has the right in California to hold his date, and they're holding that date for at least a little while. God only knows how long. I didn't really want to do like a formal presentation. I wanted people to ask me questions like, how did you get to where you are? What did you think of when you first found out your brother was killed? What did you do? And how did you handle it? For years, I could not deal with November 10th because that's when he died. It'll be 46 years next Wednesday that he's been gone. I couldn't deal with November 10th. I was like, I did anything I could to avoid facing November 10th. I don't do that now. So I want to thank Martina and her team. And actually my niece, my brother's oldest daughter, who joined in the victim offender dialogue, she did her own, but together we achieved some healing that we had not been able to achieve in all those years prior. I mean, it was literally a roller coaster, up and down, up and down. Yes, I'm laying it at the foot of the cross. Oh, nope, I'm taking it back because I'm really pissed. Yes, I'm laying it at the foot. Nope, I'm taking it back. I couldn't do that anymore. I had to get some meaningful peace. And the victim offender dialogue gave me that opportunity. So, questions?
Somebody wants to raise a hand, we can do it that way. Or if you want, you can type your questions in the chat. Liz, if you would answer a couple of the questions that you posed yourself a minute ago, we can start from there while we're waiting for new questions. I do see a hand up.
What questions did I have? Oh.
You said I was hoping that people would ask me questions like
how did I get started with victim offender dialogue? I made one phone call to a police officer within the San Diego Police Department and found out some relevant facts that led me to ultimately to the San Diego District Attorney's Office. And then, as I said, on to victim offender dialogue through the Ahimsa Collective. And again, part of what I learned from the San Diego District Attorney's Office was that I could get copies of the transcripts of his parole hearings, earlier ones as well as later ones. And that was enormously helpful in realizing that this gentleman went from a 19-year-old homicidal person to a 1946 makes him, what's that? Come on, 1946 makes him 60 something.
75.
75. So the 75-year-old person who's now much more mellow, he realizes what he did, and it's been, his realization didn't just come overnight. In fact, it came over a very long period of time, a period of time in which he was in a setting that was not conducive at all to changing spirits, minds, and hearts. I mean, you're locked up in a prison for the better part of the day. You have very limited contact with life-changing alternatives. I mean, Martina can speak to that. He did a lot of that changing by dialoguing with other people. And yet he didn't have the support that he needed. And I'm not saying that what he did was okay, but he didn't have the support he needed to become other than what he did at that moment on October 10th in 1975. So I don't know what else people want to know.
Andrea Weiser has a question. I'll try to find you on the board, Andrea, and unmute you.
I unmuted myself. Does that work?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I guess this question comes really from the fact that I have always been incredibly impressed by people who have, had such a serious crime, been a victim of such a serious crime or harmed in such a serious way, who are able to forgive the responsible individual. And I just wonder, there are some crimes in this country where we allow those individuals to speak in a courtroom about what they want to happen to the responsible individual. And I actually work in a restorative justice program with, so I work with some people on both sides, and we often have trouble getting impacted parties to come to the circle. It's a voluntary, task for them. And I wonder if there's things we could do in our culture, I don't know, as we talk to these people that would help them come to the point sooner where they can think about the possibility of listening to what happened to the responsible party and what brought them to do what they did. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's like, your 40 years it's great. It came, but so many of them, as Martina was saying, for many people, it's not for 20 years. And I can imagine that, even if all you have is grief, it's just hard to overcome. And just how do we help? Is it a problem in our culture? Is that maybe really the answer? But how can we help move people forward faster?
Shall I speak to that? Or Liz, would you like to go first and speak to that? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I'm muted. Okay. Am I all right now?
Now you're
Okay, so all I really wanted to say was that those 46 years from the time my brother was shot until he died, I have gone, as I said, it's a roller coaster. And I've had periods of relative calm where I don't think about it too much. And then I've had periods where it has all but consumed me. I would say that it's a very individual process. I mean, I have sisters who don't agree at all with where I stand on the issue. I have one who wants blood for blood, would love to have seen the man die, and others who just think he should give life for life, as in spend the rest of his life in jail. Well, I don't see that. I don't see the efficacy of that. I don't see the humanity of that. And I don't see the value of a prison system that costs so damn much and achieves so very little.
Right.
Oh,
Thank you.
Martina?
Yeah, I can add, having worked with many survivors who actually are in forgiveness. And one thing I've noticed is for most of them, forgiveness seems to be a two-part journey. A lot of them, like Kevin, who was shot in the neck when he was 13 and has been paralyzed ever since, he said, I just couldn't be angry anymore. It's so exhausting to be angry, because I think as human beings, and we see that in catastrophes, how we are with each other. And I think our nature is much more one of being empathic. And our higher development, I think, is much more of empathy and compassion. And revenge lives a little more in our lower reptile brain, like the an eye for an eye. Revenge is a little bit, you have hurt me, therefore you must hurt. I also see it as an misguided need for empathy, because revenge is wanting to know that the other person knows that I am hurting, and to receive empathy sometimes can, switch that around, that people then, once they really have received all the empathy for their pain, They no longer feel the need to hurt somebody else. So that's people, right, not wanting to have this, oh, I want to hurt back impulse anymore, because it actually doesn't feel good for them. So Mama Jane, I think, said it best. She used to say, or she says, when she came to the VOD, she said to the person, I had to forgive you for me, right? So that I feel better. It wasn't so much about the other person, but so I could feel good within myself. And then she said, now I'm here to forgive you for you. And I've heard many survivors talk about forgiveness in that way, that it really was first more a self-serving, right? Like more, I want to be on the good side of life. I don't want to be angry. So then that's the other question, what many seem to start asking, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? And to want to be compassionate, it just makes people feel better about themselves. And I think it's more innately who we are. And those are the two, big questions that people ask themselves. Who do I want to be? And then how does it serve me to be angry? And is there another option for me? And once they start looking for something else, they seem to be finding forgiveness at times.
Thank
And
you.
the other, if I can add, so the main thing I think in our culture and in the United States, I'm from Germany, right? Our culture, particularly here, is not particularly one of taking accountability, right? To this day, this country has not taken accountability for the harm, the structural harm they have caused, right? Germany has done immensely around taking accountability for, Nazi Germany. And I don't think also that we teach children, what does it really mean to be self-responsible? And that's where it starts, right? The grieving, the healing process starts with being responsible for what's happening in my internal world. And we don't teach that. I mean, I think you get that in church, the going inward. But we don't teach that in schools. So people don't necessarily know what to do with themselves when things like that happen. So that is one thing I would hope that we, show people more how to actually do that, how to cope and be and process all the things that happen inside of us.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Paula asked, this is a question mostly for Liz, what happened during the VOD that made such a profound change for you?
During the VOD, the offender that I was speaking with read first of all, from a prepared statement, and then answered some questions that I had. And some of them were very tough questions. While he was answering those questions, I was studying his face. I watched his eyes. I watched I listened to his tone. And I perceived a genuine sorrow and a genuine remorse, not the kind of remorse that comes when, oh, shoot, I got caught. This was more like, I am sorry. If I could undo it, I would. Well, the thing about taking a gun to a fight, or wherever, in this case, a robbery, is if you brought the gun and you're going to use it, you had a murderous thought in your mind. And he did. He was ready to do what he had to do to get the money that he needed. It turns out that a couple of days before my brother's murder, he and a buddy had held up a Chinese grocery store. The grocer in that store had a gun under the counter, pulled the gun out, and everybody took off. So the guy who ultimately shot my brother still needed money. And I said, was that my brother's problem that you needed money? He said, no, it was mine, and I own it. We need to have people say from a very early age on, I own what I did. I will accept the consequences. One of my 3 sons, when he was in the 1st grade, came home late from school one day. And I said, geez, you're late. He said, well, yeah, I was walking with so-and-so. I said, well, what were you doing? He said, throwing beer bottles onto the ground. I said, really? So I said, okay, get a dustpan and brush and a bag. We are going down there and you are going to clean up some of those. But what about the other person? I said, I'm not his mother. I'm not in charge of that. I am in charge of you. And he remembered. He had a sense of responsibility. For 1.5 hours, he had to sweep up the glass that he had broken. He never did that again. I mean, he tried other things as he got older. They're creative, independent people. We have to make people accountable for all their actions. And it doesn't matter that this dude needed the money for whatever. I don't care if it was for his kids' diapers, his drugs, or whatever. It doesn't matter. You don't have the right to take somebody else's life in order to get that money. And you need to understand that. So.
And did you feel that he expressed that understanding during the VOD?
Oh, yes, very much so. Yeah.
And Linda asked, what physical manifestations happened to your body in the process during the 44 years that you were waiting for this healing?
Physical manifestations. I spent probably the first 10 to 15 years really totally avoiding the 10th. There were things I didn't go to at church because it happened on the 10th. I couldn't face people. I was depressed. I was angry at the system, angry that this had happened, and angry in a way with my own parents, because my parents thought that I should have been more forceful and representative of their viewpoint. You know, like, sorry, that's not me. Physical manifestations. I put on some weight. That was not a whole lot of fun. I got more crow's feet. My hair started to turn white. And that's pretty much it.
I'll add to the question, did any of that resolve with the VOD?
Oh, yeah. I mean, long before the VOD. In fact, the 2 years prior, when I started the VOD process, I had already had some kind of release from that, because I didn't want to give over that much of my life, of my energy, my emotional energy, my physical energy. I didn't want to give that over to that one event over which I had absolutely no control. And I had to find a way to let go of it, to let go of the actual event, my parents' reactions, my siblings' reactions. I had to let go of it. And I needed help with that. Just took a long time to happen.
Yes, I see your hand, Jody. I have a couple questions before you. I'll jot myself a note to get back to you. So Susan asked, I'm going to try to combine them into one question. How long was your VOD meeting, and what programs did the offender use in prison that opened his heart?
I think that question is better directed to Martina. Martina, can you answer that one?
Yeah, so he did. I mean, one of the main ones that he's still in is, so there are a lot of, dealing with addiction, which was also one of his issues. So the AAs, so he's still in that. And then, so Solano State Prison, oops, and it's actually okay that I said that. Is in California, we have a lot of programs. I don't know how that is in Massachusetts, but there are a lot of programs. And he did a lot of faith-based, he is a church person. And he did, I'm not quite sure what other. I know the AA, the faith-based. I know music was extremely important. So he was part of a music group. He gets to play music. It's something that he hopes when he gets out to do more of. Yeah, I'm not sure which other, but in the last years, he's been certainly more involved. It took him a little while. And there's also, so he's been in prison for 40 years, right? There was a time where there weren't any programs, like in the 80s, when, the war on crime and lock them up and throw the key away. There were no rehabilitative like the 80s and 90s. It's really just started in the kind of early 2000s that they really had more and more rehabilitative programs.
And Gail Faithful had her hand up earlier. If you would ask your question now, Gail. Do you need to be unmuted? Are you still here?
I don't see her.
Okay. Sorry we missed you, Gail. Susan asked, what motivated the offender to meet with Liz? To the extent, I guess that's a question for Martina.
Well, it's a two-parter. When I expressed interest in doing the victim offender dialogue process and Martina explained the whole thing to me, she then went to with her facilitators to the offender, talked it over with him, and then got back to me, and there was a mutual willingness to engage in a dialogue that might bring about some resolution on both sides of the coin. That's pretty accurate, Martina?
Yeah, I would say, there was from as soon as we presented, and let him know that you would, like to meet with him, there was no doubt, there was never any wavering. And so when you cause harm, there's an obligation that people often feel. And when you take a life, there's not a whole lot you can do to make right. So, people will do whatever they can, right? So this was something that he could do to make, like we say in restorative justice, to make things right again. And as hard and as challenging as it is, and as nerve-wracking. I mean, I once had a man, it took me 20 minutes to get him into the room because he was so nervous. There's often no doubt in their minds to do this because they know they owe something, right? They owe something because of the harm and all the heartache and all the impact. This is one thing they can do.
Thank you both. Susan asks, also, do we know what kind of upbringing the man had, and possibly included in that same question, although she listed them as separate questions, is how did your faith, Liz, I'm sorry, I misread it. So let's go with the first one. Do we know about the offender's upbringing and experience?
My understanding from what we talked about during the victim offender dialogue is that he grew up in a relatively nice home. So it wasn't a matter of, not being taught right from wrong. It was choices that he made as he got older. So that's that part of it. What was the other part?
How did your faith influence your journey?
my faith, my God, the God that I know and love and have done so for many, many years, to the point where if the Catholics were ordaining women, I would be a woman priest, but they're not, so I ain't. My God does not allow. My God loves in a way that encourages forgiveness and acceptance of the limitations of humanity. And that is what the victim offender dialogue represented to me. It was a way to actualize that kind of metaphorical concept and make it real. And that's, to me, that's what restorative justice is kind of all about, making real that which exists more or less in theory. I want to see more of that. I want to see people getting together, whether it's in circles, powwows, or whatever, and talking about it and being able to share the depths of their anger. And I did that in the victim offender dialogue. I didn't yell curse words at him, but I let him know how very much he impacted my family. And I think it helped him to be able to understand, coming from my mouth, since it hadn't come from anybody else's, it helped him to understand how devastating his momentary lapse in judgment was.
Thank you, Liz. Jody, I think I might have skipped over where you were in the order, but your question.
Yeah, Martina might have addressed part of my question, but I was going to say that my understanding from a lot of people is that the prison system is useless and should be abandoned because no rehabilitation really goes on in prison. And yet from your story, I kind of get the impression that reform did go on for him in prison. And so I was wondering how you feel about that question.
Whether or not prison should be abolished?
Yeah, and whether there is some rehabilitation going on in the prison system.
I think okay, I say this from the outside because I've never been in prison, okay?
Mm-hmm.
From the outside, and from what I've read of, prison budgets, very little is dedicated to rehabilitative, restorative justice kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that prison should be abolished, but I think that there are cases when something happens that it is so heinous, there's a place for prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good place to put some people who just may be beyond rehabilitation, and society needs protection from them. Now, having said that, I think you can't make that snap judgment based on that one thing that guy did to my brother. He was 19 when he did it.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that his cousin, who was with him at the time, was involved in it and was technically, by California law, a juvenile. He was 16. Mm-hmm. He got out of prison much earlier. To me, they both should have spent the same time because they're equally responsible. I don't care which one of them pulled the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So do I think prisons should be abolished? No. Do I think they should have more of the funding for rehabilitative, restorative justice work? Absolutely.
Thank you.
But we have a streak, Jody, we have a streak, really wide one in this society, of demanding retribution. It isn't justice, it is retribution. It is an eye for an eye. And well, the other side of that is an eye for an eye makes the world go blind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to see that. I want to see people saying, I want to see them sitting next to each other and saying, listen, you son of a, you did this to me. You upset my entire world. For years, I would see a green Ford pickup truck and swear to God it was my brother. I once drove behind one for several miles and I had to stop and say, my brother is dead. That is not my brother's truck. No matter how much I want it to be, no matter how much I wish it, it's not my brother's truck. We want retribution. We don't want real justice. Now, is justice giving the guy a slap on the wrist for what he did? No. Understand what you've done, accept the consequences, and make some sort of move towards restoring a balance between yourself and the people you hurt. And that's what VOD was about for me.
Actually, I saw you start to answer a little bit at the beginning, or when Jody first stated her question. Martina, do you have anything to add at this point?
Yeah, just from, and I am from Germany, somebody put in there. Yeah, so I have been in prison, inside prisons, and I do find it barbaric. And to me, there is the idea, let's make people feel really, really bad so they do good. I don't think that's a very logic. I mean, we always have to ask ourselves, what do we want? Do we want people to suffer? Yes, then prisons work really well. But do we want people to get better so that when they eventually do come out, do not cause further harm? Then the way prisons are set up are really not working. And, these endless sentences. I mean, I work with somebody, he has served 20 years because he stole an $80 backpack, right? I know Curtis, who stole $40. He's been spent 25 years in prison. So we always, often people start talking about the worst of the worst, but most people who are in prison have really not committed horrible crimes. And we know what skin color they are, right? So it's mostly brown people who are incarcerated. And then also this has been really becoming the prison industrial complex. There's in California, we have 4,900 vendors who make money off prison. And what I think also don't think about, the price of incarcerating fathers, husbands for 20, 30 years, and what that means for the families left behind. So, and I mean, there's just incredible costs. In 2014, California paid $249,000 to incarcerate a juvenile for a year. So it's really not well spent money. We could use all that money much better by really investing in communities and supporting people and changing the culture that people partly live in which is a real survival culture, particularly in poverty-stricken and racist, communities of color who deal with the aftermath of slavery. So it's very complex.
Is David still here? I told him I'd get back to his question later. I guess not. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll email him and ask his question. So I guess that means we do have time for the last question that Susan. Last questions that Susan wrote. I think where to go. Oh yeah, it was Susan. Will there be more meetings with the offender?
To the best of my knowledge, no. I mean, unless Martina, you probably know better. He's currently playing a waiting game with the state of California, the governor holds his date of release in his hands. And until the governor lets go of that and actually releases him on the parole, which he's already been granted, he sits in prison. Am I right, Martina?
Yeah, they're like 120 days after people were found suitable, where they still have to wait. And the last 30 of those 120 days, the governor can, that's when the governor weighs in. And that's in all homicide cases. So the governor could still take, the date away, and he'll have to go back to a parole hearing and another.
Right, which does not give him the justice that despite the severity of what he did, it does not give him the justice for which he's been working and which he deserves.
Yeah. So, and at this point, in terms of the VOD is a one-time event. There are no more meetings around that. I might check in with him. Actually, I will be checking in with him. And we are staying in touch with him because Liz also likes to know, how he's doing when he gets out. And so we will keep following him for a little while and stay in connection to see how he's doing once he's released.
And once he is released, the Ahimsa Collective is going to be working with him to make sure that he has housing.
Well, not quite like that. We do have a reentry home. If we have a space, he could come live with us.
Right.
But we have very, very few. But we can support him. It depends on, right? He will be supported in getting housing.
Okay.
And we will do what we can, but unless he is housed with us, he's not quite our responsibility, so to say. He might be in a different transitional housing. But in the last, I guess, five years, especially, California has really come to understand that reentry is hugely important. And people who go on parole do receive housing for 6 months, a year, and support in finding a job. So he will be, and particularly people who have been inside for that long are supported as they re-enter into society. And we will stay in touch with him as an organization and invite him and support him.
I think what I was thinking more is that Ahimsa is going to be following him, sort of.
Yeah, it's still as part of the VOD program, because that was, your family desire to know how he's doing once he gets out.
Yes.
Right. Yep. That is very important for you to know that, how is he doing? So
I'm sorry. I think Paula's question leads nicely, or follows nicely from that. Paula wrote, Liz, I'm so sorry for your loss and the toll it's taken for so many years. Having gone through the VOD, was there anything you wanted to request from the offender for him to make amends?
I think what I said to him towards the end of the VOD was, I hope that you don't blow this opportunity to do something different with your life, that you can think of other alternatives besides taking the gun to the party and then using it. Don't blow this opportunity. There are too many people who are putting it out there for you and pulling for you and praying for you and hoping that this is going to be your change, not because you got caught, but because you are genuinely sorry for what you did.
Thank you, everyone. Brenda, did you have, we're just about at 7:30. Did you have closing comments?
I just want to thank Martina and Liz for coming and giving us this wonderful presentation about the VOD, and just really thanking everyone who attended for coming in and asking your questions.
I will certainly repeat that, or I share that sentiment. I see applause from Susan. Zoom applause, and now some other lives applause. There's more applause. Yes, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
I think that, I guess I hope that one thing we take away from this, each of us in our own way, is the idea that there is another way to approach even the most heinous of acts in your life. And there's an opportunity to think differently and not think vindictively.
Thanks again, Liz. And a great final comment from Linda.
Amen.
She wrote in the chat, I think grace can come to us all despite anything we do or don't do.
Very good.
Amen to that, and peace to all.